Councillors, we'll move on to the meeting proper. There are no apologies, obviously. There's no gaps around the table. Move on to item 3. I'll move from the chair that the public part of the minutes, confirm the minutes of the public part of the oh no, this is the confirmation of agenda, sorry. I'll confirm the public part of the agenda with the following alteration with regard to Standing Order 2.1, option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 4, declarations of interests, and I again will move from the chair that the council notes. I take it there are no one's indicating any amendments to the declarations of interest, so I will note the elected members' interest register and confirm the proposed management plan. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to the minutes of committees. The first one's the council minutes, and I'll move that the council approves the minutes of the council meeting held on the 28th of November and takes part C items of the minutes of council meeting held on Tuesday the 28th of November in the non-public part of the meeting. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
Unless there's anyone who has any issue with all of these minutes here right up to item 11 with the Hearings Committee, I'm just suggesting that perhaps we could take them en masse.
Yes, I would prefer to. Yeah. More than happy with that. We've moved and seconded this one, so we'll do that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. The only reservation I have, I'm happy to take your moving them. The only reservation I have is if the chairs of the respective committees prefer to move them themselves. But if there's no objection to that, then moved Councillor Vandervis and seconded. From 6 to 11. Is there a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Lord. Okay. Is there any discussion on any of those?
I would just like to say that, as with the community boards, rather than going through them all in a very pedestrian fashion, taking a lot of time, if nobody has any particular comment anyway, it just makes the meeting a little bit less tedious.
Yeah, no, by accepting your moving it, then I've accepted that. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, and Your Worship, and in general I'm supportive of this. The only sound of caution I would note is if any of these require approval rather than noting. If any of the minutes are dealing with Part B matters from the committee, then that may not be as appropriate, but if they are all just for noting, then it's fine with me.
Up from between 6 and between 6 and 11, they're all for noting, except as Councillor Wilson points out, B of 7 just takes Part C into non-public. That's the only thing. Good point, though. All right. Is there any discussion on any of those at all? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Minutes of community boards. I understand you were going to move this, Councillor Wiley. Another bulk deal.
Yeah, Your Worship, I'll move all the minutes for the community boards.
Okay. Seconder, please. Councillor Hall. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay, on to the reports earlier than we thought we would. Annual report to the Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority. Welcome, Kevin. Welcome, Adrian. The lights are a bit bright. Sorry. Do either of you wish to introduce this, or do you want to go straight to questions? Straight to questions, right. Questions, councillors?
Your Worship, I just noticed that there's members of the DLC here in the meeting. I'm wondering if they wanted to talk to the report as well, at all, or you're not entertaining that.
Whose report is it?
Your Worship, it's the report from the DLC to ALA, to the
Well, I mean, I assume, Mr. Weatherall and Mr. Noon, are you wishing to speak to this? I would have assumed that if you wished to, you would have made it known already.
I did indicate to you, sir, and others will speak to the last
The report is actually from the Secretary, which is here. It's not there. So questions, councillors? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. I note the report is up to June 30th. Is there anything you can add since June 30th and what has taken place?
Excuse me. The report's for the year ending June 30th, but since then we've been advised of the Ed Sheeran concert over Easter, which is a little bit problematic because the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act doesn't allow alcohol to be sold on Good Friday, Easter Sunday, so we're just quietly working our way through that at the moment.
Further questions? No further questions. Would someone like to move the recommendations? Councillor Staines, second to Councillor Hawkins. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. That's good. Thank you. On to item 19, the local Easter Sunday trading, Easter Sunday shop trading policy. Simon. Is there any questions of the report or of the officers regarding the report? Councillor Vanders.
Under recommendation B1, decides to schedule a review of the local shop trading policy to begin 90 days after Tuesday 3rd, 2018. Is the intent of this basically to make this a trial, or is this more of a sort of a look back over what's happened?
The idea of a 90-day audit review to begin within 90 days, the panel suggested that was an appropriate time to do that, to capture the feedback specifically from employees around their experiences. As you heard in the earlier submission, there is a question around how employers may coerce or not their employees to work, and so the idea of a prompt review was to capture that while it was fresh in people's minds from the employee point of view, but also to speak to employers. So the policy obviously would stand in place for 5 years unless you chose to review it early. So you can review it at any point during that time, so the 90 days seemed an apt sort of time just to see how it had gone for all parties.
And can you just further explain, after 90 days, who would be doing the reviewing and how that would feed back into any future decision?
So any review of a policy would have to be done via a special consultative procedure. So really what we're signalling here is the 90 days would be the start of the information gathering part of that SCP. We were suggesting that one way of ensuring we captured the feedback would be to obviously make contact with all of those submitters who had submitted the first time around, but with special reference to unions and the employers that had come along, and also work with the chamber and similar bodies to try and engage those views as well. So just try and get that in-depth information as quickly as we could.
So, and it would be DCC staff that did this, and then how would that feed back into a future decision?
So that would be in the usual process for our special consultative procedure. So the DCC staff would be doing that, as we did for the original consultation. So we did some initial pre-consultation with the Easter Sunday trading policy, and then we went to a formal consultation. So it may follow the same kind of template.
Ms. Legary.
Mr Pickford, I think you're probably the one to answer this. In the recommendation B2, can you tell me how much influence we would have, or how much notice might be taken of us writing to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment around the raising of awareness of employers' statutory obligations?
I think the Ministry are interested in how the local policies are working. A number of councils have them, but many don't. So I think the Ministry would be very interested in how this is working for employers and for employees.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor O'Malley.
Going to background question number 5, specifically around the sale and consumption of alcohol during Easter Sunday under the current laws. Have there been any prosecutions of outlets in the previous years for sale of alcohol where the diner has been, where the patron has been assumed to be not there dining anymore but is now there drinking?
Not as far as I'm aware. I don't know whether Kevin Meachin is still there, but no, not as far as we're aware, sorry.
So in the practice of the law as it stands right now, there has not been an overt relationship between dining and, provided food is provided at the outlet, there appears to be no interest from the police to prosecute people, and there has not been like a following of that person to make sure they haven't been there for too long after their meal or anything like that.
A comment I would make is the police are obviously very aware of the sacrosanct days of the Friday and the Easter Sunday. My conversations with the police have reflected that, so the rules would be that you can go into a licensed establishment, you can have alcohol an hour before you dine, so when you order, you can have alcohol for an hour while you dine, you can have alcohol for an hour afterwards, so there's a pretty open window. What the police don't want to see is what they would term vertical drinking, so people just standing around in a bar drinking with no I've had an interesting term, with a whole room full of people that obviously aren't dining. They do define dining as well as having some cutlery as well, so we're not just talking snacks, we're actually talking about a meal that someone would sit down to properly and eat. So the police are very aware of that, and they would enforce it, I think, if there was, if they thought there were breaches.
But there has not been any prosecutions in the past?
Not that we're aware of, no.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just follow up on that, Simon, and just can you clarify the distinction or the degree to which this proposal for local Easter Sunday trading in shops, to what extent that impacts on licensed premises and to what extent they're separate?
So they are separate in the sense that the Easter Sunday trading policy really looks at levelling the playing field in terms of which retail shops can open. The legislation, sale and supply of alcohol, is solely aimed at licensed premises. So they are separate, so they shouldn't be confused between the two. So this is just looking at allowing, the Easter Sunday trading policy is just allowing all shops to open, but obviously licensed premises are covered by a separate act.
Therefore, in clarifying, this wouldn't change that. So therefore, if we're saying that people are coming in to be entertained during this period, that's still under the original act, which would still basically be as permissive and restrictive as it is now, regardless of our bylaw change.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Thank you.
Further questions, councillors? Okay, there are none. Councillor Wiley, you indicated you wish to move this, and you're moving it. Is there a seconder? Well, you move, and then, because it's possible we won't get a seconder unless we know what you're moving, so.
Move option 1, the recommendations.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Hall. Can I invite you to speak, Councillor Wiley?
This was actually a very difficult bylaw to chair, and fortunately I had a very diverse and very good team with me in doing that, and I'd like to thank Councillor Wilson, Afiso and Newell. I have to take out Councillors Newell's quote, "It was harder to pick than a broken nose." And that was very much the case. We went around this in so many emotions, and we heard every side of what was going to take place. I think when you read the report and you read the minutes, you'll say, okay, well, this is what I think. I can tell you we all tussled with this. We all looked at it from different angles. We heard it from a lot of different voices. And to me, it's probably, in being involved in a few bylaws now, this was probably the more, what I would term a 360 bylaw hearing that we've had in the past, where we actually had approaches from so many different angles. I think we really got a snapshot of what was going to take place. The famous whiteboard picture that ended up in the front page of the ODT really showed how close a decision it was. And also that we actually did listen to the community. The part that I think is really, for me, that's important was the fact we actually considered and really took on the 90-day review process from Tuesday the 3rd of April, that a review to be taken place after that period. For me, and I think for the others, but I'll let them talk about it themselves, but for me personally, I think it allows us to actually get the facts and really get an understanding of what happens in the city at Easter Sunday, what happens with the retailers, because you remember, it's not a public holiday, and not all retailers may choose to open, even if we gave them the opportunity to open. On top of that, we've heard about the workers and from the union spokesperson this morning, and we heard from them loud and clear through the submission process. And I think through that 90-day review process, we will be able to find out exactly what took place. How were employers, how were employees treated, what's been the after effects. And I think that's really important. But I think when you look at the review, when you look at what has taken place, I think this is a very sound and solid response to Easter Sunday. I think it is quite unique to any other district in the country. No one else turned around and said, we are going to review this essentially in the first year. We're going to find out what's fact and what's fiction. We're going to find out whether it's worked or it hasn't worked. Those are the keys. And I think I'd like support on this, but I look forward to hearing the debate that comes with it. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, tēnā koe, Your Worship. I want to talk about the nature of casual work briefly, and this has been picked up in the public forum. When I was at high school, I worked in the fast food industry. Part of that legacy I carry with me still today. And we were guaranteed some hours, but we didn't know how many hours that we got. Now, in our contract, it said that if we worked more than 8-ish, or 8.5 hours in any given shift, we were entitled to 3 paid breaks. We only ever got 2. And when a few of us got together and asked why we didn't get our 3rd break, as was in our contract, coincidentally, we got rostered on for fewer hours in the following week. Now, I had nothing to lose. I lived at home. I was at high school. I wasn't relying on this work to feed my family. When I joined the Service and Food Workers Union, for a few weeks after that, I can tell you I was rostered for fewer hours in my place of employment. So you can see why there's so little faith in the legislation offering any protection to workers in this circumstance, because that's not how the real world works. In the real world, precarious workers don't ask tricky questions for fear of the retribution. By voting for this policy, I think we need to be clear that either directly or indirectly, workers who are currently entitled to taking Easter Sunday off will be compelled to work on that day. And worse still, as a trading holiday rather than as a public holiday, they'll receive not a single cent more for making that concession. They will forgo family commitments and church commitments, and they will be disproportionately poor people in our community. That enough should be a knockout blow, really, frankly, for this policy. But let's look at the other considerations, shall we? The impact on the Ed Sheeran concerts. Well, the concerts will still happen. and the industries that will disproportionately benefit from those concerts, hospitality and accommodation, will still be able to trade. Most people who are travelling here will be here for at least 1 or 2 nights, I would have thought, so almost all of them will be here during some period outside of the Easter Sunday restrictions. They can shop all day on Thursday and Saturday and Monday while they're here. And given that a majority of retailers the Chamber surveyed said they weren't even going to open on Easter Sunday, I wonder we were expecting all of these walking ATMs to empty their pockets should we liberalise our trading laws on Easter Sunday. Business freedom of choice was considered, and I don't think too much or perhaps a lot could be said about this libertarian dog whistle, but I'll just leave it that any such benefit for business freedom of choice is erased by the corresponding lack of freedom on behalf of their workers. What else? Making sure Dunedin is a, and I quote, happening and progressive city. Well, this is almost embarrassing, really, in its small town thinking. We've got visitors coming here from Auckland and Wellington and Christchurch. None of them, if they'd stayed at home, would have been able to go and buy the new Lee Child's book on Easter Sunday. I don't see why they would expect to be able to do that in here for that weekend. What about the voice of the majority? I find it ironic that members who asked me how I would look ratepayers in the eye for voting against a proposal that a majority of submissions supported during the Freedom Camping debate are essentially asking me to do just that here. Now, I don't agree with that argument, but I think it would be a stronger one if it were applied more consistently. And finally, the one-year review period. The suggested review period of 1 year makes it just how cynical I think this proposal is. Despite the fact that the Act doesn't talk about writing policy on the back of special events, that's exactly what we're doing. Were we not having those concerts here, we wouldn't be having this conversation because nobody asked us to have it until they were announced. How are we going to measure how vulnerable workers felt during the Easter period, during a special consultative procedure that makes them publicly say that their bosses pressured them into working? I can't imagine they're all going to line up and do that. How are we going to tell whether the till counts on Easter Sunday wouldn't have been for things that would have otherwise been bought on the Saturday or the Monday? We won't. We won't know any of that. The data that we'll gather for the review within 90 days of Easter is something of a farce. It feels like appeasement, and I think it's meaningless, and I think it shows up how poor a process for public policy this is. For some mythical pot of gold that I think we're largely going to get anyway, we're trading away the rights of workers to spend time with their families, as they have always done on Easter Sunday, those who are protected by this law as it stands, without any additional recompense. I can't support that, and I think if this council is at all interested in the social well-being of its residents, then it can't either. Thank you.
I agree that Ed Sheeran is not really an issue here, it's a red herring. I also take on board what Councillor Wiley said, that there is not going to be a win-win with this decision. There isn't going to be any kind of decision that we can make that is going to keep any large number of people happy. So we're bound to disappoint whatever we do here. Councillor Hawkins has said that he's got no faith in legislation in terms of it really having an effect on the workers. What's proposed actually is a piece of legislation here. And Councillor Hawkins also points out, I think quite correctly, that there is quite a gap often between what is legislated and how the real world works. The lack of a win-win is of concern. I've not known really which way to jump with this one, and it's largely because people that I speak to outside of the submitters and outside of this organisation haven't really cared one way or the other. And I'm talking about people that just are everyday workers in any kind of situation, especially since a lot of them these days are part-time workers anyway. The foregoing church commitments, I think, is much less of an issue than it has been in the past. It's certainly not one that's come up for me. And not really knowing, not really having any feedback other than the official submitted feedback here, I find myself basically having to lean on the decision of the subcommittee that actually made the decision, and the subcommittee that actually drew the short straw, and the subcommittee that I'm glad I wasn't on. And thank you very much, all of you that were on it. So I don't believe Ed Sheeran is something we need or want to consider. I think that there will be some helpful information come out after 90 days. I'm not convinced that what we do with it is going to be particularly useful for a lot of employers or employees, but I hope that it does. I think that if we simply lean on the decision of the subcommittee in this particular case and hope that we all take some real interest in the information that comes from this in 90 days' time, that we will be able to do the best that we can, recognising that it's not going to suit a whole lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Firstly, thank you very much for everyone who put us on this committee. It was an interesting one, and it was fraught. And the reason it was fraught is because the government gave us legislation that gave us no hint. When we do a bylaw, we have 3 matters under the Local Government Act and sometimes others under other legislation that guide us to the matters we take into account. This time we had none of that, which makes it fraught. We invented one on the day, as we had to, which reflected only the submissions we received. So and it was tight, as those that read the ODT and saw the whiteboard analysis. It was 11:10 or 11:12 or something like that. It was particularly close. And those matters that we took into account were Ed Sheeran concert, which isn't necessarily something we need to take into account or should have taken into account, but it did reflect the submissions. Others were the workers' rights, faith and family, and the choice to open. The choice to open is really interesting because while a lot of the Chamber of Commerce said, yes, I'd like the choice to open, 66% said they wouldn't open. Now, and the workers' rights were very, very clear. We asked every business owner or management that came in, what is your process? And none of them said that they thought the process was any different than any other public holiday, albeit the Act is very clear that it is. And that is of real concern. In fact, we voted for the review before we did the other vote in order to ensure that there was a review should the policy go ahead. In the process, I think my numbers came out against the policy, albeit on the balance of the methodology we went through, I voted for it to go as a recommendation to come to the council. However, I'm not going to be voting for it today because I actually think it sets the city up to a really mixed and bad message. One is that we know that 66% of businesses are not going to open for it. Some of the businesses that came to us won't be the ones that tourists want to go to. I mean, with all respect, I don't think Mitre 10 and Bunnings are looking like they're going to be getting a lot of business from the tourists. I'm not quite sure. How many need hardware? The other ones of all of the submitters of businesses, I only think one was likely to be actually working themselves that day. That was a supermarket manager. We still have the problem of Friday. If it's a real issue, we've still got Friday to sort out. And I think it's better to give one continuous and clear message that if you are coming, come prepared to make sure you've got food or bookings or whatever. And that is a much easier message because no one is going to know which businesses are actually going to open. And I think it's fraud. So that is why I'm going to vote no. I actually think it's going to be a lot easier for the message for the city to be clear to the people coming here that they need to get their act together and get organised. But I also think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to show the other things in the city that make this place special, that we need to be promoting all of those activities, whether they're tourist activities or free activities that the city offers, and I hope that we do that well.
I know I've done that.
Well, you've got both of them now.
Oh, I've got that on, that's why. Yeah. How's it working? Yes. I think the reason that we're debating this in the first place is because of an abdication of central government to actually take on its obligation to set this up in the first place. And that was my statement at the start of this whole debate, was that this shouldn't even be in this chamber. I would take comfort from the fact that if the newly elected government decides to get its act together in time, this may be a moot decision, although I don't think that will necessarily happen. In the question time, I clarified, I believe, that the hospitality industry would largely be unaffected by this bylaw, that the laws that dictate their trading capacity still override anything that we say today. So therefore, when we say that the Ed Sheeran concert is coming to town and what will the people do, well, they'll certainly be drinking as much as they were going to be drinking one way or the other beforehand. And when you go for a holiday weekend to go to a concert, you don't go to buy lengths of wood from Mitre 10, and it's very hard to get them back to Auckland on the plane. So it's unlikely that anything that's happening associated with that concert is particularly affected by us, except maybe casual entertainment. It brings to the, and I do acknowledge the 90-day review period, the period of review afterwards, and I think that does reflect the concern of the committee to make sure that at least the effects on the workers are noted. I have doubts, though, as to whether that review can actually achieve anything because of the nature of how it will be conducted, and also what authority do we have to do anything afterwards anyway. But at least it's there, and it does reflect, in fact, that there is recognition that this will have a potential negative impact on workers more than anybody else. To that point of the workers, there are only a few days left that are sacrosanct for family. And I noted that when I lived in the United States, a very important holiday for family which had no religious connotations was Thanksgiving. And I noted that we now have Black Friday sales here in Dunedin. So it's good to see that the commerce has come, but unfortunately the respect to the family vacation that precedes it has not come. I believe that it is important to protect these last few days. Even if historically they were once religious days, they may no longer have their roots in any particular family in a religious observation, but they are a day that is guaranteed that you will rest, that you will contemplate life, and that there is more to life than simply turning over money. And therefore, protection of those days is important for our society as we go forward, just thinking about who we are and what we do. And I do also think that the businesses that would open, that currently can't open, the effect of not opening that day is going to be relatively minimal, because the kind of things that they are selling are non-perishable goods, most of them. If you don't buy it on the Sunday, you'll buy it on the Monday. So most often it's not, when a shop is closed and it sells something like that, you're going to be buying it the next day. The supermarkets are more worried about the fact that they're going to be inundated on the days in between, but they're not going to lose much in the way of sales because people don't starve. They just have to organise when they do their stuff. So I see that the impact on businesses is not as great as some would say it is. I believe the impact on workers is much greater, and when you put the two together, you have to go in the favour of the workers. So in this regard, I will be voting against this, simply because I don't think we should go down this road. And I just want to finish with, it needs to go back to central government. We have a new government now, and I'm sending a message back to them. Act on this, please. Thank you.
Further speakers. Councillor Gary.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I first of all want to acknowledge my colleagues who were on the hearings committee, a very difficult and challenging hearing. I also want to acknowledge the people in the room who are representing the workers. It's very important that we take that into account. I have a different perspective on this to my colleagues, and perhaps I'm not as cynical. I have a mantra that always assume the best until you learn otherwise. And maybe that sounds a little naive, but it does come from a point of experience. So yes, I do believe central government should be dealing with this, but that is not the case at this point. My experience of working in a lower paid sector is that it depends very much on the employer that you have as to your experience. And I was very surprised actually to see this document, the Shop Trading Hours Act 1990, because I'm a person who looks through every detail of my contract. And I had never seen this document, I'd never read it, and there were some surprises in it, and I would suggest that most workers wouldn't be perhaps aware of their rights. So I do take that into account. The real world experience for me was that with a good employer, there was still a bit of emphasis on choosing when you would work and when you wouldn't. And yes, I appreciate it's subtle, but there were ways around that. And my experience was that with a good employer, often the days when people do choose to work and they do have a choice of working, and I'm talking in this case New Year and Christmas, that there were some people amongst the workforce who were really happy to work for a variety of reasons, and not necessarily the reasons that Councillor Hawkins was talking about. So it might be that somebody was working on Christmas Day who were away from their family. In fact, they were really pleased to be with colleagues, the employer treated them well, they had a great day. I know that's not the experience for everybody. The other point I'd make is that, of course, the hardware aspect isn't necessary, but there's also other shops, and I'm not a big shopper at all, but what I do is I shop when I'm away on holiday. So in fact, for those people coming down here for some of the big events, it's very likely that they will unload their wallet, and we want them to do that in our city. And that is not the be-all and end-all of everything. The reason that I am able to support the recommendation on this occasion is because it has B2 in it. And in a funny sort of way, in an ironic sort of twist, I think this is going to raise awareness of workers' rights. I'm interested to see what the feedback is. I'm interested to see the review. And I do believe that we can get some very valuable feedback on this. It's the only reason that I can support this recommendation as it stands is because the B2 is in there, because I want to hear what the experience has been for the workers. So I will be supporting this recommendation in its current form.
Councillor Elder.
I talk to a huge number of people through Facebook and with personal interactions, and I noted that about most of them are saying that we should keep this Sunday sacrosanct because people need a rest. The other side is I've also talked to business owners down the main street, and one small business said that as a result of the Elton John concert, if they had 4 Elton John concerts, they would make $50,000 extra a year. And this was quite a small business. And so one side of me is saying, we really need to look after the workers' rights. And the other is saying that when we have exceptional circumstances, we should be able to change. The law doesn't allow us to say, if there's an exceptional circumstance, we can trade on that Sunday. It says that if we abide by this law, it's every Sunday of every year. I would really like to see that if it's an exceptional weekend, when we've got 60,000 visitors, then our businesses down the main street can benefit from that. They are competing against online shopping. They are competing in a very tough world, and many of them don't survive. So my heart says we should keep it sacrosanct. My head says when we've got 60,000 extra people and our businesses are struggling, would we not keep this Section B where people's rights are respected, like the shops have a choice to open and the workers have a choice to work. But also I note that Bunnings has put in their one that in fact they're going to give a day in lieu. We can't force that on people, but I would like to see employers looking at models out there and going, we need to reward our workers for working on a day when they could have been with family. So I would encourage employers to look at their behaviour in employing people that day and say, if they're working on that Sunday, they're only getting normal wages, they're not getting time and a half, then perhaps those people deserve a day in lieu where they could have a day of rest, in which case I think that compromise would be a good one. But at the same time, I'm going for option 1 with a review next year with the view of seeing what the workers have to say and what they want to see. So I'm going for option 1.
Further speakers. Councillor Laufisa.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues on the committee and thank you, Councillor Wiley, for your chairmanship, and also to Councillor Newell and Councillor Wilson, especially for being more experienced as a councillor and your aroha and patience with us and trying to teach us as newbies, Councillor Newell and I, show us the ropes in terms of this process. I also like to acknowledge the people in the public gallery who are listening to this debate. And when it comes to this recommendation, I voted against it in the hearings process, and I'm going to be voting against it today. And I just want to explain why. When we had our little matrix where we had in columns, we had Ed Sheeran, we had workers' rights, we had business freedom of choice, and the fourth column was family and spiritual. For me, Ed Sheeran and the business freedom of choice was neutral, so it was a 0 vote, and as for the impacts on workers' rights and family and spiritual matters, for me it was a -4. That's 2 minus 2 votes. So for me, the reason I voted neutral on business freedom of choice and Ed Sheeran was that for me, this focus on Easter Sunday trading and commerce and versus religious rights and workers' rights is very much only a small part of a huge picture. And if you know of me and some of my debating in this chamber, I am very conscious and aware of the impact of what's called neoliberalism, globalisation and finance, and the impact that that's had on workers and us here every day for the last at least 30 years, especially with the advent of Rogernomics and euthanasia and what have you. So for me, this little focus on Easter Sunday trading is actually a reflection. For me, I need to look at the big picture, and I see that workers are hurting, and so are businesses in the choices, the lack of choice they have. And I'm not talking about the choice of whether to open or not. We are all locked into this huge global demands of the so-called market, and we haven't had time to step back and say, there must be other ways of doing business. There must be other ways of raising money. So I don't think we need to be open for business. We are open for business, and yeah, I just will be voting against the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree with Councillor Vander's comment that the Ed Sheeran concerts are, in this case, a red herring. I know that many businesses would like the opportunity to open, because of the number of people who will be in the city. But it is a red herring. It's a one-off. What concerns me is something that we were told during the public submission, during the public forum today, and that is that many workers don't have copies of their employment contract, or in fact, an employment contract at all. I have personal experience of this through a family member who, until considerable pressure was put on this person's employer, had no employment contract, had no conditions that they could rely on a piece of paper to protect their rights. So I am open to the argument that employees will suffer the consequences of our decision. But is this something that we should be taking into account in debating our decision today? It seems to me that employees, particularly minimum wage employees and part-time employees, are having their rights abused widely in this country. We're seeing some public outings of employers who are paying staff less than the minimum wage. This is not something that happens in one or two instances. I know it's happening around Dunedin. I have contacts that are telling me some employers in this town are paying less than the minimum wage. So, we have a problem in this country. We have a real problem in this country that bad employers are not following the rules of legislation designed to protect workers' rights. So, in making our decision, we are creating an opportunity for that bad behaviour to continue and to expand into a day which currently is sacrosanct. However, should that be the determining factor for our decision? I think a comment was made that government has a role to play here. And I believe they do. We have labour laws in this country to protect employees, particularly the vulnerable employees. And it's the government's responsibility to ensure there is adequate policing such that those people who choose to be bad employers don't get away with it. So, for me, the hard decision is, do I vote against Easter trading because it could cause bad employers to take advantage of their employees? Or should I say, take the other side, which I think was mentioned by Councillor Elder, that we should not have to worry about that. That should not be a factor. Employees should be able to have their rights respected, and therefore it turns to the other side and says, should employers have the opportunity to be open on these days, possibly strengthening their position, possibly protecting the role of their employees or the jobs of their employees. So I'd rather see our government take the employment law more seriously, police it more vigorously, punish those employers who choose not to obey the laws, and make our decision a lot easier. So, after having said all of that, I'm still of a mind to vote for the resolution with the protection of the 90 days. And I think we need to think of how we may get submissions to our review that can be made anonymously. I think we need to understand this. And if there is widespread abuse by employers, then I think as a council we would have no choice but rescind the right to open on Easter Sunday.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I think I can support this. I do see I've weighed it up from all sides, and I see the interesting dynamics. I do note the workers submission, but I also think that it would be unlikely to think that those same workers work 52 Sundays a year. The reality of it is everyone will be having some Sundays off, and you know, I'm probably tend to be a bit like Councillor Geary. I actually would enjoy the chance sometimes on a Sunday to go shopping, and it is something that I would do. I sat there and I listened to Councillor Lafiso's commenting on the faith reasons, and I have had people say to me, you can't support this, you've got a faith, you go to church, you can't support this, but it's something that I grew up in the days when we didn't have weekend shopping at all. That's come in the last 30 or 40 years, and it's exactly the same with Sunday shopping and supermarkets opening and everything else. And I note when I'm, you know, I live 40 k's from the supermarket, so when I get there, I often, if I go to church on a Sunday, I'll often go to the supermarket on the way home, and I'll be the first to say that I'm not usually the only church person there I see. So I think if people were really, really concerned about that, they should show that same consideration on any other Sunday. So I'm supporting this.
The speakers. Okay. I will pass a few comments myself. I must say, along with just about everyone around this table, I find this an exceedingly difficult call to make. And can I acknowledge the arguments of virtually everyone, in fact everyone who's spoken, even though the arguments that have been put forward seem to, in some instances, conflict with one another. They're all made in good faith, and they all have a degree, and a considerable degree of validity on both sides. And in situations like this where we've had a hearing and we've charged some of our members with deciding on this, when it's very difficult, my default position is, well, these are the people that we put in place they heard all the submissions that I didn't hear. They weighed it up, and I can see that they've weighed it up really carefully this time. So my default position normally is to say, well, they know more about it than I do, and I'll go with that. And in this case, I will go with that, with the recommendation, but only because of one thing, and that is the review, because I think, I accept that Ed Sheeran in some ways is a red herring, but 60 or 90,000 extra people in the city isn't, insofar as they're going to be here, and they're going to swamp. They're going to swamp the place, and having anything for them to do, whether they're buying long sticks of timber they can't put on the plane or not, anything they can do might soak them up. But I would point out something about the 90-day review, because I think the 90-day review very clearly puts the employers on notice. Because if this council, this is going to be close, regardless of which way it goes, this is going to be close. And if it goes through, this council will be looking very, very carefully at that review. And we're putting the employers on notice that if we get a whiff of ill treatment or exploitation or abuse of staff, this is gone. This is the only time it will happen. So that is the one thing that persuades me that this is a trial, because I completely respect the arguments that have been made around the table against this proposal. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think most of it has been said, but I do wish to make a few comments. The first is that I hope that Councillor Hawkins will publish his comments, if not by way of a monograph, at least in the Otago Daily Times, as an op-ed, because I think he encapsulated the arguments around this coherently and intelligently, much more intelligently than some of the comment I've heard this morning, sadly. I think the comments about government focus are absolutely germane and relevant. This is just like the debate about freedom camping, where we should not, and other communities should not be the ones who have to face up to the hard political decisions that centrally elected politicians of whatever colour like avoiding. And I think this call should be made in Wellington, and this call, as it should be, with the freedom camping issues. And I think it's an abrogation of that responsibility of central government to ask for the hard questions to be decided by local communities who, as we have certainly seen this morning, display the confusion of confliction. I think we've all come to the point that the Ed Sheeran opportunity is just rubbish. The people who are here will not just be here for the few hours of the concert, they'll be here before and after, and if they want to go to Wall Street or the Meridian or goodness knows what else they can. And by the way, many speakers have already said, well, most of the hospitality will be open, we know that, and accommodation will certainly be open. We know how many people are hosting visitors in their own homes, myself included, thanks to my daughter who didn't ask. So the city may be full, but most of us have also been overseas, and some of us have enjoyed time in places like Catholic countries, like Spain, or France at Easter. Well, don't think about buying anything or finding a cafe or a restaurant open. The place is shut. Now, that is an extreme position which doesn't actually bother anyone in those places, either the locals or visitors. Why then would we have such a bizarre reaction to the fact that people who are coming to a concert will still be able to eat, drink and be very merry and enjoy the concert and stay in their accommodation, but won't be able to exercise their retail rush in one or two places around town? I think it's really sad that we're having the debate. I think it's really unfortunate that government hasn't taken on its responsibility to make this decision. But I think it's also even sadder that so many people around this table appear prepared to trade the rights of working people for private profit from a few owners. I won't be supporting this bill.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues Wiley, Lafiso and Wilson. I was quoted as saying this was a very, very difficult decision, and it hasn't got any easier. I'd like to acknowledge the public forum, and thank you very much for your passionate submission also during the process. This is about, for me, is about consistency rather than cherry-picking some businesses that can open and some businesses that can't open. It's about giving everyone that opportunity. Will they take it? Well, according to surveys, a lot won't, which means a lot of workers will not be put in any dodgy positions. It's a balance for us, and it was for the panel, as we've heard, of workers' rights versus businesses' rights to open. The law has protection for those employees. It doesn't work, as we've heard from Councillor Staines, in a lot of instances. That is why we put in the review. I think this is an amazing opportunity for our city, the likes of which we're not likely to see anytime soon with this influx of people coming over one particular weekend. I agree with Your Worship that it is putting employers on notice, and throughout the submission process we also asked many employers what plans and what consultation they'd given their employees, and the results of that weren't flash. So they are on notice. The only reason I will be supporting this is the 3-month review, and I also suggest that if we see that there are flagrant abuses, that we are duty-bound to act. I also send it back up to Wellington as well. It's just time that some of these decisions were made at central level. Thank you.
Speakers. Councillor Wiley, your right of reply.
Again, you can hear the passion around the table on this topic. And again, how it comes from so many different angles. And I think the one thing we can all agree is if this was an easy decision, government would have made it and we wouldn't be here debating it for the last 45 minutes. So, but anyways, we did. We went through the process and we took it all on board, and we went through a lengthy deliberation process and to get this, what we came with. The first thing that I wanted to look at was the submission numbers and what we received. On page 78 and 79 of our report, you can see them for yourselves. When you add in the likes of the Chamber of Commerce and the Dunedin host, and you extrapolate that out, we had 175 that wanted option 1. We wanted 8 that wanted option 2, and we wanted 133 that want option 3. That works out at 58%. Adding together 1 and 2, 58% wanted the shops to be opened. Only 42% came to us saying they didn't want the shops open.
Order.
Again, yep.
Point of order. This is introducing more new stuff into the debate, which wasn't really part of the spoken stuff already. I know it's referred to in the papers, but what the right of reply is meant to be doing is responding to the matters that have come up.
That's fair. I do uphold the point of order. That's
Just trying to get a point that people look at the submissions and they look at how they actually came together in presenting the case.
Just did it again.
So the part looking at the key that you want to look at is we also had the shop trading hours legislation. That was really important, and I'm glad that most of you or all of you have read it, especially on pages 10, 11, 12, where it really talks about the employer's obligations and the employee's rights. We have heard from retailers, we've heard from everybody the impact on retailers. We've also heard the impact on food service workers. The one thing that I consistently heard around the table was about bad employers. There are more good employers in this city than there are bad employers.
Prove it.
And that's what we have to look at. We don't want to penalise the bad employers, we want to support the good employers. And I think that is really important. And also, not all retailers have told us they'll be open. Some will choose to close. But the bottom line is, we have heard loud and clear, well, not loud and clear, but we've heard clearly, I believe, what the community wants. We've had a very good discussion around the table today. And the bottom line being is on April 3rd, within 90 days of April 3rd, we will hear, I think, very loud and clear what the community wants, what they thought, what took place, what were the facts. And I think that's really important, and I think that's what set us apart from every other community around the country. We want to be really proactive after Easter Sunday. So I know I won't get you all to support it, but please support it and support what's good for Dunedin. Thank you.
okay, councillors, I'm going to put this as a division. Sorry? Sure. So the request is that we put this separately. So the first one will be A. Oh no, actually, that's kind of irrelevant anyway. So what you're suggesting, Councillor Benson-Pope, is A and B1 and then B2.
Yeah, I think B needs to also be taken in parts, Mr Chairman, because while I clearly don't support the recommendation, if it does pass, I would want to be able to vote for a review.
So what I'm saying is I'm proposing, in response to your request, that we take A and B1 together and then take 2.
Yep.
B2, okay. So the first The first decision is...
Sorry, Mr Chairman. Don't we have to take B, the first bit, the adoption, separate from B1?
Oh, I see what you mean. So
that's actually the substance
of the vote. It's actually three parts to B, it's not...
And you have to take A separately because presumably everyone
Right.
wants to consider the report, but maybe take A without a division and then...
So we'll take A without a division, it's easier. So I'll put A. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. B, well, it should have been B.
Just B.
B. And we'll do that by division.
So just B?
No, just B. It's actually very confusingly set out here. It should be B 1, 2 and 3.
Councillor Benson Pope.
No.
Councillor Elder.
Yes.
Councillor Gary.
Yes.
Councillor Hall.
Yes.
Councillor Hawkins.
No.
Councillor Laufeto.
No.
Councillor Lord.
Yes.
Councillor Newell.
Yes.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Steadman.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
Aye.
Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson.
No.
Mayor Cull.
Aye.
Carried 10-5.
And now we'll put B1 and we'll do that by division as well, to be absolutely clear.
Councillor Benson Pope.
Aye.
Sorry, aye. Thank you. Councillor Elder.
Aye.
Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Laufeto. Councillor Lord. Councillor Newell. Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis. Wiley. Cull.
Aye.
Carried 15-0.
Now it's B2.
Councillor Benson Pope. Elder. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall. Councillor Hawkins. Laufeto. Councillor Newell. Councillor O'Malley. Councillor Staines. Councillor Steadman. Councillor Vandervis. Councillor Wiley.
Yes.
Councillor Wilson. Mayor Cull.
Aye.
No, it wasn't. I voted no.
No, it's 14.
Sorry?
I voted no.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Didn't see the point.
14-1.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to move now that we adjourn for a break. Second to Councillor Staines. We'll come back at 10 to 11. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, councillors, we'll get underway. We have a quorum. And we are on to item 20, the update on the housing report. And if I could invite Ms Gunn and Ms Pinfold up. Welcome. Now, would either of you like to introduce this, or do you want to go straight into questions? Straight to questions. Councillors, any questions? Happy to move. Okay. Doesn't appear to be any questions. So is there a seconder? Second to Councillor Staines. You want to speak to it, Councillor? I do, just briefly, just to note that, and it is referenced in the report, I think it's a very opportune time to be looking at housing in Dunedin, but I would note that it is, one of the reasons it's an opportune time is that it's a pressing issue all over the country. It's not an exaggeration to say that there is a housing crisis of different types in virtually every centre in the country. And the reason that that's been brought to my attention is the Local Government New Zealand Roadshow that I've been working on. And although it wasn't flagged in the presentations by LGNZ to most councils, virtually every second council indicated that they were having issues around housing. In some instances, it'd be affordability, like in high growth areas like Hamilton, Tauranga and Auckland. In other places, it'd be availability, like some of the Otago towns of Cromwell and Clutha. In other places, it's quality, like Dunedin, where we have, as the report references, a big proportion of low income, of old housing that is, frankly, in many cases, not fit to live in. But I note also that, as well as local government focusing on the pressures going forward of housing, the new government that's just come into play is also particularly exercised about the need to address this issue at all levels, whether it's developing minimal rental housing standards, or whether it's getting more social housing up and running, or whether it's just getting more houses that are able to be afforded by low-income people into the market. They're very exercised, and in that regard, I have had some conversations with the Minister of Housing, Phil Twyford, and it is very much a focus. So this is an appropriate time for us to be looking at the challenges coming up for Dunedin. And I'd point out that although we tend to think of housing issues as being a social wellbeing issue in the main, especially with minimum rental or lack of minimum rental standards, in fact, it's an economic issue too, because if you are endeavouring, if your population's growing, you're endeavouring to bring more people in, endeavouring to fill jobs, and endeavouring to attract businesses, if you don't have homes for people to live in, it's a major economic constraint on your community's ability to develop. So this is serious stuff. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any other speakers? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Well, that was now, on to item 22, the Mosgiel Aquatic Facility Project Advisory Panel, and I think that Councillor Staines, you wanted to address this.
Item 21.
Your Worship, it is item 21. I was just wanting to suggest to the council members that we proceed with appointing the advisory panel, but do not adopt the terms of reference at this stage. I am down to be chair of this panel, and I would like to be able to work with staff and the other panel members to refine the delegations in the terms of reference and to bring those back to a council meeting early in the new year. So what I would ask today is that we only consider the appointment of the panel and we leave the terms of reference to a meeting early in the new year.
So you're moving as such.
I will move that.
You're moving A, and you're moving
all of those.
B,
yeah.
But you're noting that the terms of reference are yet to be agreed. So it's an additional line. That's really what will let you. Right, okay. Was there a seconder? Councillor Wilson, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Sorry, and does that include the naming of the parties that are otherwise referred to by office? The problem being in Roman 3, though they are two animals, not one. Beautiful animals, of course.
Your term, not mine.
And I understand that Councillor Steedman is the person who's
right, yeah, well, obviously
put himself forward for this task.
And Councillor O'Malley.
Obviously, when you've got an animal of that type, you need to have it named. Yes. So, yes, so this is Steedman, and that's in Planning and Environment. And in O'Malley. So I take it that the two councillors, the two animals referred to, were aware of this. Councillor Malley, were you aware? That's right, that's what I mean. But we need to be naming. Oh, no, that's right, there's only one of you. That's right.
BC is...
All right. Can I invite, since you've moved this, Councillor Staines, do you wish to speak to it in the first instance? Councillor Vandervis.
Can I ask why it is that the establishing a councillor advisory panel terms of reference that are on page 93, can I ask for an explanation as to why these terms of reference are not deemed to be appropriate? We've just been told that they want to change them. I'd like to know why.
Councillor Staines, since you moved it, you can respond to that.
The reason is that until I read the papers, myself and the other proposed members of this advisory panel had not seen the terms of reference. Now, in reading through them, firstly, I don't think there has been any discussion with the full set of panel members over what the terms of reference should be. Secondly, some of the items that are in there I have concern overlap with the responsibilities of the trust. So this group, as I understood it, was to be in the middle between staff who are to actually specify the final pool, and the trust, who are the body representing the community over what they want in the pool and fundraising. And so, reading through the delegations in here, I see there are some areas where that is grey, and some areas where it would look as though this group was taking over responsibilities that had been sitting with the trust. So I think we need to sit with the trust appointees on this body and with staff and decide what is the role for this body. And my view has been that this role should be one that helps bring the community and the council together to a point where there is agreement and that the information from both sides flows and is understood by both sides to mean the same thing, so that we can pull this project into a point where it can be specified and then council can decide on the funding. So I see this group more as a facilitation group between the parties to get to an outcome of both agreeing on what it is we're trying to achieve and how we're going to achieve it, so that can be brought to council for the final decision making.
Can I add to that that the terms of reference need to be agreed to by this council, not just by the board. And I hadn't seen them either, and I don't think anyone around here has seen them, and I don't think it's appropriate, A, to just swallow them whole, because it's clearly not acceptable to the, I think you'll find that you won't have members on it if these were to prevail. And I don't think that we're going to be able to rewrite them and re-engineer them in this meeting. So by necessity, I think that.
I have a number of follow-up questions. One is, why is it that the terms of reference weren't made clear to all the parties in advance?
Well, I don't even know if I know that we know the answer to that. So. But the point is we're responding to it now.
Given that we're responding to it late, should we not actually get the terms of reference sorted first? Because if we are to agree to a number of committee members to do something in a committee, surely we need to know what the terms of reference of this committee are in order for us to make a valid decision on who's going to be in it.
Well, probably the best way to handle that is to move that as an amendment. So it's been moved and seconded as a motion now. It's on the table. It's up for discussion, noting that the terms of reference will be amended later. If you don't agree with that, you can move an amendment or vote against that.
Can I ask how soon it's anticipated that new terms of reference will be available, and whether or not the council will have the opportunity to review today's decision as well as the new terms of reference?
I don't see any reason why council, if it were pertinent to the composition of the panel, then I don't see any reason why that couldn't be, if that was the will of council.
Right, and how soon do you anticipate new terms of reference being available? February.
We have a meeting scheduled of this advisory panel that was put into our diaries so that we could meet prior to Christmas. So if council is of a mind to allow the terms of reference to come after Christmas at the first opportunity, then that meeting will be used to establish the terms of reference to the satisfaction of the members of this advisory panel and staff who have a role in the governance of the project.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you. Now, so we've got a motion on the table, so I'll call for speakers now. I appreciate that the way we've done this means that we haven't had a question time, so I will take questions from people that won't negate their speaking rights, if anyone has a question. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for indulging questions. My question is around the terms of reference here, and I'm not suggesting amendments, I'm just seeking clarification between what's in the terms of reference and what's in the commentary in the attached paper, because under the terms of reference it says the role of the advisory panel is to provide advice to the project team, consultants and peer reviewers and so on, which seems entirely legitimate, but then in the interpretation of that precedes it, it says that each individual member of the advisory panel would be able to deliver their feedback to the project team, and that doesn't seem the most efficient way of doing it. I mean, ordinarily it would go through the chair of a group to funnel back that information, but it also could potentially put, I don't know, I'm just trying to protect people from miscommunication by making it has a more consistent approach to communication with staff and the project team being considered, is my question.
Yes, excuse me, the terms of reference were a draft that were included in ERA. They are not what is envisaged as the final terms of reference. And so the points you make are well made, and the working on the actual final terms of reference will look to those matters. They'd intended to be drafted on the arrangement that was in place for the Selwyn pool, which, in speaking to the people involved in that, worked really well for both the community, the council, and the people. Oh, sorry. So,
it's a shout.
Yeah, I know, and it's a shout, and it's former Councillor Calvert, so really it is a shout.
Right, Councillor O'Malley, then Councillor Vandervis.
Mine's just a comment on why I'm happy with holding back these terms, is that I feel that this panel is going to work because it's supposed to be centred around enhanced communication between the trust and the council as it's been operating right now. And our role, I think, is to make sure that everybody is consistent as we go through this very complex set of negotiations and community expectations and other such things that are going to be uncovered here. So in the spirit of that, it would be appropriate to meet with the trust when we set up the terms of reference so that the trust itself is happy with the terms of reference that we're operating under. So that's why I'm happy to hold it back. And in terms of me being on the committee, it's because effectively infrastructure sits as one of the contributors to the pool, and I think that's why the committee membership's been made up the way it has.
Councillor Vandervis, do you wish to ask another question? Or?
Yes. I've got no problem with the recommended appointments, but I do wonder whether or not, and I don't know if anyone can answer that here, whether Irene Mosley, Bill Feather and Martin Dillon were aware of the proposed terms of reference when they supposedly signed on for this committee. Did they sign on under any circumstances, or did they sign on with an understanding of the terms of reference as laid out in '94?
I can't answer that definitively, I'm sorry.
So no one here is sure whether they even knew about the terms of reference?
I assume that they knew there would be some, but insofar as they're still only drafts, they can't have ever seen final ones, any more than we have.
Thank you.
Further speakers or questions for that matter? No further speakers. Right, a reply?
Oh, sorry, I did mean to speak.
Oh, fine.
Just,
yep, far away.
I have a difficulty voting for approving a committee when the committee may not even be aware of the terms of reference that they are going to be subject to. If I was any one of the people from the Community Facilities Trust and I was being basically made part of a committee that was going to be telling me later on what the terms of reference were, I would be very unhappy to do that, because I think that your involvement in a committee like this really has to have in advance knowledge of what your terms of reference are. The terms of reference really define what this committee is going to be able to do, how effective it's going to be, and with all the goodwill in the world that Councillor O'Malley puts forward, there is a bit of natural tension in this situation that the terms of reference I think are very important for, and I think the terms of reference need to come first. I'm also particularly concerned that there is a perception, whether it's real or not, that the City Council has been dragging the chain on the Mosgiel Pool project for some time now, and that this is adversely affecting the ability to raise the significant private funds that have been, I think, one of the strong points of this proposal. To hear now that we're going to have to wait till February just to get terms of reference, I think is really unfortunate. I'm concerned that if we vote this recommendation that includes 3 trust representatives who are not here and who may or may not agree with whatever terms of reference come up, is potentially fraught as well. You've got a situation where if we agree today to vote Irene, Bill and Martin as representatives on this advisory panel, that they will then be in a position of essentially being able to call the shots on the terms of reference if they come afterwards, because if they don't like the terms of reference, they can say, well, actually, you know, I'm not happy with them and therefore don't want to be part of it. Further delay is potential. So I would like to suggest that perhaps Sandy Graham, our Wonder Woman Fix-It governance officer, might be able to suggest a way that we can speed up the process of organising the terms of reference. I know it's close to Christmas, but it's still a couple of weeks, and hope that someone can turn their minds to getting the terms of reference issue, and I think it's a real issue, sorted this side of Christmas rather than February of next year.
Well, I don't think Ms Graham is in a position to be able to say, yes, we could do this off the top of her head, so I'm not expecting her to respond to that. But you're at liberty to vote against this if you think it's untenable.
I was just hoping that there might be an attempt to try and get it.
Yeah, I'm sure that they will as much as they can. Councillor Newell and then Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you very much. Crikey. Okay, there we go. I think rather than Councillor Vanderlis mentioning that the council has been seen to be dragging their heels, I think it is miscommunication between the two. I'd like to think everyone has been acting in best interest of the community. I look forward to this panel liaising between the two, because I think there has been a bit of a game of Chinese whispers in the community, and this facility is very, very crucial to the Mosgiel community, and also to alleviate some of the pressure that's on Moana Po at the moment. So I, for one, look forward to this. I'm wondering if there's any possible way we could have the panel confirmed today, subject to the agreement of the terms of reference at a later date.
So you're suggesting just an amendment to the wording where we note that the terms of reference will be finalised at a later date, subject to the agreement of Council and the Taieri Community Trust. Is that agreeable to you? Councillor Staines, you moved it, yeah. Okay, did you get that? It makes sense, because really that's the point that Councillor Vandevers was making, so that addresses...
Can I just check? What we wrote notes the terms of reference will be brought back to the council early in 2018 for confirmation, but if I change that to note the terms of reference will be developed in consultation with the trust, with the Mosgiel Pool Trust, and brought back to council. Is that okay?
Well, they've both got to agree, so... If you're happy... Right. Councillor O'Malley. Great, thank you. Any further speakers? All right, so I'm going to put it, so we're aware that it's as on the order paper, plus the, I'll ask Pam actually to put it up on the board. So, notes that the terms of reference will be developed in consultation with the Taieri Community Facilities Trust and brought back to Council early in 2018 for confirmation. Okay, is everyone happy with that? So I'm going to put it, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. On to item 22, submission to the Remuneration Authority, Part 3, consultation. Welcome, Ms. Russia. Do you wish to introduce this, or...?
Just for the purpose of addressing some questions that came through from Councillor Hawkins, he queried whether or not there was an error in the submission, and yes, there is the short answer to that. So if I could just take councillors to page number 130 of your agenda. And in the second box on that page, the first question in the bullet point says, should councillor remuneration be decided by each council within the parameters of, and the question carries on. In fact, councillors said at their workshop that they didn't support this option, and so this part of the submission should be adjusted to read, no, this is strongly opposed by the council. And the second point that was raised by Councillor Hawkins was a comment in the box above. If you look at the second to last paragraph, a matter that was raised was whether or not the role of mayors and chairs should be treated as full-time. Councillor Hawkins' comment was he thinks that the reference to chairs relates to a regional council position. In drafting the submission, I had thought councillors were telling me that the chair of a standing committee for this council was a full-time role, and if I could just have clarification from members on that point as to how they want that submission to read, I can make that short change.
Just so we get absolute clarity, those of you who believe this relates to chairs of regional councils, please raise your hand.
Sorry, in terms of the questions being asked of us, or the submission that we are making?
It mentions here, notes that mayors and chairs should be treated as full-time roles. And the question is, do we understand that to mean mayors and chairs of regional councils, or do we understand that to mean mayors and chairs of committees? So what I'm asking is,
surely that shouldn't be us to make that determination.
No,
surely it's go back and ask the people that asked the question.
No, this is our submission. We're the ones that decide what it means. Now, I'm pretty sure that
but it's not our question,
this was referring to chairs of regional councils. What's in question here is what we understood it to mean. So what I'm asking is, those of us who made comment to Ms. Russia about this submission, what did you understand it to mean? Well, did you understand it to mean chairs of regional councils or chairs of standing committees? Of committees. So can you please raise your hand if you thought it was mayors, chairs of regional councils? Right. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, and those of you who thought it meant chairs of committees? Right. We've got about the same number, so that's a bit of an impasse. This is not something that is appropriate for me to cast a vote, have a casting vote on, I might point out.
Indeed, and look, I wonder if that submission should be adjusted to refer to chairs of standing committees. If that was council's wish, then we could clarify that point and that would remove that ambiguity that's there at the moment.
Well, then we've got to gauge the opinion of the council in general. I'm not sure that we can conclude that that's the case, given that it was even. Councillor Van der Westhuizen.
I don't think there's any doubt that the position of mayor is an absolutely full-time position, but I would question whether all committees chairs are full-time. Is just to throw a
right. So perhaps
the
easiest way, if I may, to clarify that would be to ask you to raise your hand if you think that the chair of a committee role is a full-time job. 1, 2. So it would appear that we can't legitimately say that the opinion of this council is that we treat chairs as full-time roles. Councillor Hawkins.
Yes, certainly mayors, and I don't see why we wouldn't support a regional council chair if we want to make that more explicit. But generally in local government, when they talk about mayors and chairs, that is what is intended.
That's right.
And so I support this as drafted, as long as people understand what it is that's drafted, I guess was my question.
Okay, is everyone clear about that? Right.
So that concludes my comments on the drafting of the submission.
So I'll invite any further questions on the submission. Councillor Gary.
Could you just tell me if the change, and I was wondering about that myself, the change to no, this is strongly opposed by council, then affects the section on page 131, other remuneration issues around community board remuneration from the council pool?
Yes, there would be a consequential change to the same effect, so that would be reversed to no, and this is strongly opposed by the council.
Further questions?
And could I just ask a supplementary question? And just wanted to clarify, wondering if we could add, the professional development, under funding professional development, it's not clear that that also relates to community board members, and I wondered if some clarification around that might be useful, say all elected members or something such as that, to make it clear that they're included in that.
Elected members?
All elected members, yeah.
Comfortable with that?
That amendment?
Further questions? Right, if there are none, would someone like to move the recommendations? Councillor Hawkins, seconded Councillor Elder. You wish to speak to this? Any other speakers? Pretty straightforward, but a lot of work's gone into this already. Yep. All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Christy. All right, on to item 23, speed limits bylaw. Welcome. It's a bright light, that one, isn't it? Right, would you wish to introduce it, or do you want to go straight to questions?
Just a few brief comments.
Yeah, sure. Way you go.
Mr. Mayor. Let's just take the report as read, apart from the following textual amendments, just to change some references. Paragraph 15, change the reference from Table 2 to Table 1. Paragraph 16, change the reference from Table 3 to Table 2. Paragraph 18, change the reference from Table 4 to Table 3. And paragraph 19, change the reference from Table 5 to Table 4. And then in paragraph 20, it should read, having considered the submissions, it is recommended that speed limits as proposed are set out in Table 5, so not as revised. I so move.
Right. Questions, councillors? No questions? You happy to move, Councillor Wiley? Yes. Second, Councillor Wilson. Do you wish to speak to it?
All I can say is this was much easier than the previous one.
All right.
And it actually makes a lot of sense for the
Right. Any other speakers? Going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. And now I will move from the chair that we move into meeting moved into confidential for the reasons outlined in the agenda pursuant to the provisions of the Local Government Act. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.